We're back for another one.
Yeah, and a good one this time.
Very
criticised.
Well, you say Mezzotint. The Mezzotint. Now, before we get into anything regarding synopsis and stuff like that, smash likes, smash subscribe and stuff like that, please. You know, apparently we haven't begged enough. Please. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of it, the nitty gritty, right?
Yep.
I want, for the folks at home, for anyone at home that doesn't know, not me, I know, of course I know. Why wouldn't I know? But for anyone at home that doesn't know, could you explain what a mezzotint is, please? Not for me, just not for me. I know, right? For the folks at home, if you could explain what a mezzotint is.
Mezzotint, my understanding of a mezzotint, which could be completely inaccurate, is that it's one of these pictures that we would put on the wall that looks a little bit as though it's been etched in brass or etched in copper. That's what I get.
So a print of an etching.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yes, which I knew. I knew that. It's a print of an etching. Which was
made me doubt myself now. Right, I'm going to have to Google it.
I'm actually pretty certain it is, because it's the etchings themselves are blocks that are carved, and then you put ink over the top of the carving, and then you press that down onto a piece of paper, and it's that print that is a mezzotint.
Obviously, Google's not working because I'm getting semi-naked pictures of Carol Vorderman, which I'm not criticising.
Did you miss the N out of tint?
Saving that in, I'll save that one for later.
Wow. Two from the top, Ash.
Yeah, and she might want a big one as well. So,
right. So that's what a mezzotint is, a print from an engraving. So it's that they used to basically, before the photography was well known in print, they used to engrave things, and then that's what would be inked and blotted down so that you would have a copy of the engraving itself.
Which makes sense because it was from a 1904 story by M.R. James. And yeah, it's...
And the engraving itself would have been older than that when you look at what the job of the narrator is when he... Well, not the narrator, actually, but we'll come to that in a minute. But the actual, with the theme that's going on, why this mezzotint got in the hands of the protagonist, basically, is he was collecting them for a museum, wasn't he? So it would show that would actually be an older piece anyway.
So what did you think to it?
We'll do the synopsis. Do the synopsis.
Synopsis. Right, synopsis. So, Mr. Williams, the curator of a university art museum that's implied to be Oxford, receives a mezzotint from an art dealer. The very disturbing engraving changes each time Mr. Williams and the colleagues he enlists look at it. In the end, it is suggested that the nighttime engraving depicts a vengeful poacher named Gordy returning from the grave to kidnap and murder the infant heir of a Mr. Arthur Francis. Gordy had been hanged for shooting a gamekeeper while poaching on Francis's land.
Yes.
That's pretty much it.
Yes.
Yes. So come on, I'm desperate to know. What do you think to it?
What did I think of it? I found it very interesting. I found it there's a couple of bits I found interesting about it. One, which was its style, by using this unreliable narrator idea, because it was a friend of a friend almost, the way that it was told. It had a very informal way of speaking as well. It was like somebody telling you a story by the fireside in the way that it was actually written, and I really enjoyed that. And I found really fascinating is how ingrained it is within ghost stories, that idea. I've never read the Mezzotint before, and I've even used the mechanic within that story in a story of my own, and it's in a couple of Stephen King's. He obviously has it as a favorite story as well, because he uses part of the mechanic in a couple of his stories. So it's
Black Dog or Sun Dog, one of them.
Oh, that one I don't know. I know he definitely uses it in It, and he definitely uses it in The Shining.
Yeah. I think there's actually one. It might be called Black Dog, which was meant to be just after Needful Things or just before Needful Things. And there's somebody that's got a. Do you remember those spectrograph things where you?
Oh yeah, the 3D viewers. Yeah.
Somebody's got one of those, from what I recall in the story, and each time they click it, the dog in this image gets that little bit closer to the person. And yeah, you can sort of like definitely see echoes of this story in that one.
The slideshow in it is the classic case of it. Like I say, in the photograph in The Shining, that's 3 Stephen Kings where that's going on. In my own work, there's the story at the beginning of Blood Ink involves a photograph that does the same thing. And I just saw it as kind of like a ghost trope, where actually when you look at it coming back from here, where this trope kind of develops from, it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating, especially as they talk about photography in the story as well. And there's a lot of little points, so many little points that I want to go into with this, because it was when I first read it, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. When I first read it, it didn't blow me away. I was kind of like a little bit, I was expecting more from it. But then I read it a second time, and then I listened to it as well, being read by someone else. And when I listened to it, I kind of got it a bit more, because it's so conversational in the way that it's written, that I wasn't putting the emphasis in the right place. So I was missing part of the whole conversational feeling of it. So when I listened to it, it was much better. And I suddenly, now I get those little, nuances between certain things.
Yeah, because it's almost as though he's sort of like being dismissive about the way they talk about golf, and oh, none of us want to hear that crap, do we? And it's just, I like this bloke. Yeah, we can get on me and him. Yeah.
Yes.
And one of the things that I think is interesting with it is, whereas we were saying last week with the Demon Lover that it was almost like it was a middle without a beginning and an end.
Yes.
I'd say that this is a beginning and a middle, but the end just seems to be.
That was the thing that I think the first time I read it was kind of like, you're reading this thing going, oh my God, there's this spooky shenanigans. And I'm going to go into a little bit, because the main thing of the Mezzotint itself is they keep looking at it and it keeps changing. There's a figure in it, and it opens a window, and then you see it come back out again with very little description of what goes on. But the amount of paintings that people have done based on this story is quite remarkable, actually. But so they've got this moving picture. They've got the picture itself has a life of its own. I suppose it's it's foreshadowing Harry Potter in a way. I suppose Harry Potter probably uses that, like that's that same sort of trope. So this is what's going on, and they're constantly looking at it, and they refer to photographing it, but it's really kind of all these Oxford College lecturers, isn't it? It's all his colleagues, and they're all kind of just being really academic about it, because it's like they've hidden it in a drawer, and they go in to have a look at it, but they have breakfast first, and they probably take about, and the way he describes it as they probably take about an hour before they look at it, and they've probably discussed this and golf and tennis, and that's what they would have discussed, but I wouldn't know because I wasn't there. And it's that kind of really kind of light-hearted feeling to it.
Yeah, there is. I was reading somebody who's read this and had thought it's almost as though it's been presented as a comic strip. Here's frame one where there's nothing in there whatsoever, and then somebody else looks at it and we see frame two, and there's the suggestion of a figure just coming into it, and then we've got frame three, and moonlight's starting to creep in, and so it is very fixed in the way that it's doing that, and that description is just, the description reminds us just how dependent we are on description when it comes to fiction writing. The way that things can be stacked. So look, there's and once again we can see the big building, and the big building's in the background, and there are 3 rows of windows, and there's 5 windows in each row. And last thing I'm going to say is there's a big fucking scary monster right on the lawn that's eating a baby. But which would have been the first thing that anybody normal would have said. It
was very plot bus. Are you familiar with the plot bus?
No.
Right. You get it quite a lot in genre TV, where basically something comes along and we say, all aboard the plot bus, because it's no matter what happens, the plot has to move forward, however stupid it is. It happens in Lord of the Rings, actually, where they go to see Tom Bombadil. It doesn't appear in the films; it's only in the book, where they go and see Tom Bombadil, and they end up on the Burrow Downs. And
one second, what's that? Is this about Lord of the Rings, the books?
Yes. That's fine. That's fine. I'm not selling them here, I tell you. But they get onto basically Tom Bombadil is the most powerful thing in the known universe, right? And they go, oh, here, take my ring. And, nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah.
And they say, take my ring. And he says, no, because I'm so old and powerful that I'll just forget I've got it, right? But here, use this whistle. And if you get into any problems, give this whistle and I'll come and help you out once. And in the very next chapter, they end up on the Barrow Downs and they get into problems and they blow the whistle and he comes and gets them out. And basically, Tolkien wrote himself into a cul-de-sac and brought the plot bus along. And everybody gets on the plot bus and then it moves to the next bit, you see. And
I mean, I've said it before, Tolkien hated kids. He hated the kids. And it was just a case of, look, you little shits, go to sleep or I'm writing another chapter of this fucking awful thing. And you're going to have to sit through
I'm not a fan of the books. I really am not a fan of the books. But this is not about whether we like it or not. No.
Yes, it's not.
It's not about that. Yeah. But the plot bus in this, and like I say, you kind of see them around the place when things just move in to come in. But this is, the Mezzotint itself is the plot bus. And the way you just described it as a comic strip works beautifully for that. Because it is I wonder what's happened to the Mezzotint now. Mezzotint now. And then it's all like, you have a look at it this time and you write a statement and sign it. And there was all that kind of stuff going on. But they only photographed it once.
Yes.
So, yeah.
It was 1904. They were all sort of like bringing their androids out of their pockets. And
but he was dead excited about
it.
He was dead excited about photographing it.
But photographing used to be so expensive.
These were college lecturers. This is what he lived for. He's got his box brownie and he's going to take a photograph of it. You'd have thought, wouldn't you? When it changed, take another photograph of it. And then you've got two photographs of it changing. And even of the time, to be perfectly honest with you, that is one of those things that I think, because I'm reading this much older than, I think if I'd read this when I was 12, it'd have blown my mind. Because obviously the stuff it inspired blew my mind. Where this, because I'm reading it older, I'm kind of like, I'm a little bit, I'm being a bit unfair because it is actually an unreliable narrator, to be perfectly honest with you. So there's lots of stuff that's probably gone on that he's not even spoken about. Because he's secondhand telling the story, isn't he? He's not even there telling the story. He's not even part of the story, the narrator.
Yeah, I think it's missed the twist. I mean, I love it. Don't get me wrong. It's one of my favourite spooky stories. It's the sort of thing that you can tell around a campfire, Christmas nights. You can sort of like, this happened. It's got that wonderful feel about it. But I do think the conclusion needed to have happened earlier on. I think we needed to have something where there's a chance of the Mezzotint coming to get you, the reader, or coming to get people who've actually owned it. Whereas it's almost like a werewolf story where you get to the end of it and they shot the werewolf and everything's finished and the werewolf's never coming back, and nobody will be happy with that story. We want that whole, but it might come back again.
That's the unfulfilling part. You're absolutely right. Is you kind of, there's two parts of it. You don't feel any peril because it's not even happening to the narrator. This happened to a friend of mine, that kind of thing. The only bit of real terror is when the help is in. I can't remember what they call them now. The squire.
Servant, butler.
Yeah. He comes in and he finds it and he's utterly offended that they left such a horrendous picture out on display for anyone to be able to see it. So that's when you get some real terror coming in. But it should have been more of a curse. It should have had that, because remember, I mean, this is Mr. James, as I like to call him.
Yes, I understand that.
He wrote the casting of the runes, which is an amazing story, and was the inspiration behind a film like Night of the Demon and Drag Me to Hell, which is there's a lot of peril, the curses you can't get rid of. And it felt like that it should have had that. And when you're reading the story of where it came from, you're thinking, there's got to be a curse on this. And then it just stops.
Yeah, which yeah, it is kind of frustrating that happens.
Yeah.
Because yeah, there was just so much. I mean, part of the horror that we've got there is, as you say, when the bloke who's either a servant or whoever the hell he is comes across it accidentally. Sorry, encounters it accidentally. He wasn't coming across it at all. It wasn't that sort of.
But he'd been able to make a very different type of print off it if he'd done that, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he encounters it and he's horrified by it. And I suppose that's where we get the greatest horror. Not the horror of the story that's gone on, the story that's behind it, the idea of this monstrous creature going into the Mezzotint world and abducting a baby. But whatever it is that this fella's seen and that's so horrifying,
yes,
that's what touches a chord with us as readers, thinking, well, I'm glad he didn't describe that part because, yeah, I'm already feeling pretty bloody nervous. That would have really had me crap in my pants.
Yes. What did he see? You know, up until that point, it's very academic. It's very kind of like, it's a curious, isn't it? It's a curio that they're all his colleagues around. Oh, what's he done now? And there's no fear involved in that until you get this one unlearned guy who just complete horror at what he's seen. And that's that. I thought was that I love that scene. And I love the whole classness of it as well. That the servant fella is horrified that he's been caught sitting in Master's chair. He's been taken aback by the image so much that he sat down when he shouldn't have. And that, you know, it gave you that kind of that sense of exasperation about him, which I thought was great.
I suppose that would tie into this whole notion of class, where we've got sort of like the upper class academics who are looking at this and are indifferent to the horror that it presents, whereas we've got somebody who actually works for a living who is not indifferent to it, is actually appalled by the horror that it represents.
Yes.
So do you think that is James showing an empathy for the working class or showing a supercilious superiority of the upper classes?
I think now you've asked me that question. I think he is being satirical against the upper classes in that. I think he is actually, especially with the stuff where he kind of goes into the talking of the golf, and we shouldn't really talk about that because we shouldn't bore you with what they're going on about. I think a lot of it is actually mocking the pomposity of that level of academia.
Which, in fairness, it is quite right for mockery.
Yes. Because I think a lot of it does that. I think a lot, because he describes about having the rooms and going to halls and, you know, where the master is and all that kind of stuff. But I think there's it's a little bit sarcastic in the way that it's written about all that, I think. There's a little bit of kind of, because he's telling the story to someone else, you know, he's recounting what someone has told him. And there's a little bit of that. The person who's telling the story is not an academic. And he's talking about this world that his friend is in. But he's also not working class, the guy that's telling the story. He's not one of the working classes either. He is definitely more of the learned classes. But he's definitely not part of the academic world. And he does seem to, reading between the lines, I think he has a certain level of amusement about the way they go about things.
Do you think that these framed narrations distance us from the actual horror, or do you think they add another level to the potential horror that we can get from the story?
I think I'm going to bring back the Shirley Jackson idea at this point and say that there's a certain setup. I think the punchline is the horror that the servant gets from it, and then the story is what's supposed to make you think about it continuously afterwards. But the setup is very much about trying to create this reality of the world, and he's trying to create the reality of what it's like being an Oxford academic. And so therefore, when you get that juxtaposition in the reaction to the actual image itself, it should hit harder. So that's what I think he's doing with it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that first-person narrations can be quite intense, but you've already got the giveaway there that with the first-person narrator, they're still going to be alive at the end of it, because
Yes.
obviously they got to the end and they were able to write the end of this story. So that takes away some of the narrative tension. A story where somebody's saying, oh, and this bloke said to me this, and then he said this. Already we've got that distance away from it. It's like the quality is like when you're watching a camcorder rip of a Hollywood blockbuster. And it's just, well, I can see that there's meant to be something really good going on in there, but there's somebody walking around in the front and we're getting all these distraction techniques that are,
You see, I think the classic thing for that is when he describes a conversation he's not at as being something that's probably what they would have spoken about, rather than this is what the conversation was. And those kind of things they don't drag you out of the world as such. It's, you know, you are in that person's world still because you are listening to him talking, but it's definitely more having drinks in a bar type conversation, that you're listening to this person recount something rather than live it. And that definitely comes across.
And that could just be me being disingenuous about it and mean-spirited, because perhaps for its original audience, that was building the narrative tension. Perhaps the original audience were there going, screw what's happening in the bar, what's happening with the bloody Mezzotint.
Yes.
Whereas now it's just a case of, I was into the Mezzotint story then, and now you just reminded me you're sitting there dicking around and being in a bar or whatever.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that sometimes the audience that it was written for isn't necessarily around anymore, and you've got to try and put yourself in the place and what's around it. So, you know, I mean, the idea is fantastic. The idea of something moving in an image, and actually the recording of images. I mean, it published 1904, I think it was published, wasn't it? So, and photography is 18 something. Can't remember when photography really came in. So these prints were prior that, you know, they're what created images going back, but only really going back as far as the Gutenberg press. You know, that once you, before that, it's all hand-drawn manuscripts and stuff like that. So you're talking a relatively short period of time to be able to record images. So to have that concept of moving images when you haven't really got that many, it's still a novelty watching a moving image on a screen, or, you know, you still had the candle animations and the 3D viewers. They did actually have ocular, what do they call that? I can't remember. Ocular scopes, I think they were called, where you just dropped two images in stereoscopes. You dropped two images at the end and you look through it, a bit like that thing you were talking about with the switches. So it was all very, very new back then still, you know, and the idea of recording images like that. So to have that thought that something was going to be moving around in the still image, still to this day, is really creepy, you know, really, really creepy. That's why the Ring.
What we're saying that he's a forerunner of sort of like techno horror, then, like the Ring, like
I think so.
Like these Japanese urban myths where if you get into a lift and press a certain sequence of numbers, it takes you to a level that you can't get to in any other way. And
13th floor elevator was in Scream comics in the early 1980s. Yeah, that's that kind of idea. I think it's one of those interesting things, because the way that he's done it is kind of still a retro technology that he's done it with. He didn't do it with the photograph, which was interesting. So that's why they only took one photograph. So he kind of mentions the technology that's going on there. But the image itself is a much older image that's happening with, which I suppose ties into having the story. They wouldn't have had photographs to be able to tell a story of 100 years previous.
I suppose also it would have looked incredibly rich and excessive if somebody'd had a series of photographs, or photographs that were and you would probably not have a readership that were sufficiently familiar with photographs to realise that they don't move.
Yes.
Which, and again, this isn't me sort of like saying that all people from the past were stupid, but they were.
No, it's what Douglas Adams was saying, was it? He's, you know, the Douglas Adams of the 3 laws of technology, which is anything that existed when you were born is always, anything that came into being before you're 35 is brilliant and world-changing, and anything that is created after you're 35 is absolutely bloody useless, and I don't know why they've messed about with that sort of thing.
Guy was spot on, wasn't he?
So I see what you mean. So the technology of the time, yeah, I suppose when you think about it, the technology of the time of more mass market photography at the time as well would have given that idea. You know, people would have seen a photograph. Can you imagine never, ever in your life seeing a photograph and then picking one up? It would have been 3D in itself, because it would have been a likeness like you've never seen before, which is why back in the day they were taking photographs of dead people and all that kind of stuff, because it was just such an amazing thing.
Well, that, and it's sort of like Say's trying to keep them in the bank, doesn't it?
I believe that was probably the second photograph ever taken. I believe the first photograph was the curtain, because he got his timing wrong and the curtain hadn't been pulled back yet.
That would definitely be about right. So this one gets a thumbs up then.
Yeah, I mean, from a critique point of view, I'm going to give it a thumbs up. I actually think it's in the history of short story writing, I'm going to say, yeah, I think it's an important one, because I think it has touched huge amounts of not just horror genre, but fantasy genre for years afterwards. You know, that concept of something moving in a photograph, in a picture, it's I mean, I need to look things up. You know, I don't know when Dorian Gray was written. I think that was a little bit later, wasn't it? I think. Or was it 18?
Whilst you look that up, I'm just going to grab a quick Coke. I'll be 2 seconds. When was he?
1890. So very much within the same time frame.
Yeah, so it seems like it was sort of like a common idea around that time for maybe not so much the animation, but the fact that, images might be a little bit more spooky than we
see them now. I mean, it was always a thing, wasn't it? In the great haunted house, Victorian ghost stories of, the portrait, its eyes follow you around the room and all that kind of stuff. You used a great comic effects in Carry On Screaming.
In Scooby-Doo.
And very much in Scooby-Doo, yes. There was a cartoon, wasn't there, where the eyes came out once and actually knocked something over. That was one of the Warner Brothers ones. Where the eyes used to come out on stalks because they saw something, and it actually knocks over a glass with his eyes before it goes back in again. So yeah, it's one. So images have definitely been used that way, and have always been seen as having soul. So I suppose to have something like that was. I mean, just imagine reading that for the first time. That's where I kind of put myself sometimes, and yeah, that it would have had quite an impact, I think. But it's interesting that it softens the blow at the end, very, very much.
What you'd said before about how you listened to it 3 or 4 times, or read it and experienced it 3 or 4 times. I've got to admit, each time I listen to it, it gets better. The first time, I just thought, all right, story about something moving within a picture. Second time, yeah, I actually like the way this is going. Third time, it's like revisiting with old friends. So yeah, it does have that level of appeal for me. And yeah, that ending, I mean, it's almost like an Indiana Jones ending, isn't it? Where the Ark of the Covenant's sort of like put in that warehouse, and it's just going to remain stored in there. And it's almost like, this Mezzotint, it's in a museum somewhere. And
it's the only bit that truly lets it down. Because even though it does have that, I think, Indiana Jones probably is looking at that as an influence sort of going through. But it is, like you said, there's no sense of continuation with it. It just very much ends. And I mean, description wise, when it gets there's a little bit of kind of falling on the story all the way through it, but I won't call that a negative. I think it actually works quite in quite a fun way. Like the entry in the book about the house has a history and pretty much tells you who made the engraving. It's sort of like, he always was in the grave. And then they talk to the other guy about it, and he just has the whole story that explains everything in one go. It's very exposition, but then it ends. And I like the idea. Like I say, it's still there. I thought that was quite good. I would have liked it if they just went and nobody's looked at it since, rather than it gets looked at every so often and nothing's moved on it.
Yeah.
I think that would have made, just that simple little thing would have just given it the air of, oh, I wonder if it's still in those archives. I wonder if it's still in that drawer, and where actually, it hasn't done anything. So there's no point going looking for it. Where if nobody's looked at it, it becomes an artifact at that point that needs to be, sought after, and then allows you to write more stories in your own head as you go to bed at night.
Yeah, I think he potentially missed a trick there. Although apparently it's referred to within other stories within Ghosts of the Antiquary, the collection it was in. Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's there are some meta references to it. So perhaps somewhere within there's something else that's been said about it.
Maybe, but I think it's one of those. It might be kind of need retconning. I think in that respect, and that he might refer back to it and then hasn't retconned the original story to just give it that little bit of extra balance. I wonder if he did do that. I wonder if is it a bit more, he wrote a more horrific ending and was told he had to change it, and out of protest he wrote something really sort of like banal.
His protest against an editor is to do
to write something banal. Yeah.
Are we saying he's like a Bill Murray type person? Because I'd heard that story. Bill Murray apparently on the set of Groundhog Day, he was having real problems with the director. They just had a big falling out. They weren't communicating at all. And it was upsetting all the schedule. He was turning up a little bit late. He was refusing to do various things. And one of the grown-ups sort of like went down and said, look, Bill, just so that you've got a chance to get to the end of this movie and maintain your friendship with this guy. It was Harold, what's his face?
It was Remis.
Harold Remis, yeah. Said, just so that you've got a chance to get to the end of this film, what you need to do is hire a personal assistant. And that way you tell the personal assistant what you want. The personal assistant then goes and gets instructions and everything from Harold's team, and they'll get back to you. Bill Murray hired a deaf mute.
Yeah, it's the petulance. It's the petulance of it, isn't it?
I mean, I don't know where you would actually get a deaf mute PA from.
Well, just look them up in the yellow pages.
But yeah.
The one I know with that kind of level of petulance is Syd Barrett from Pink Floyd, when apparently when they went into studio and some producer asked him if he could write something a bit nicer than what they, a bit poppy. And so he wrote a song called Bike, which is, I've got a bike, you can ride it if you like. It's got some bells and a wheels and things to make it look good. And he just wrote it, and they released it, they recorded it. So he wrote that out of a petulant, thing against the producer.
So yeah, I suppose there is a very strong possibility that's what M.R. James was doing. He was just sort of like thinking, do you know what? Great scary story here. I'm going to scribble this ending out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think under what somebody else has said, and I have a reason for thinking that, but that's going to come in a little bit actually when we talk about next week's work. But it does because it just feels so tacked on in a way. It feels like it went somewhere else. Like this guy told the story, and then it's just begging for that curse, idea to come forward at that point, and just and anyone who looks at it and sees this thing moving, that their children get stolen, or that sort of Lady in Black type thing going on. It just feels like it needs it, and then it just in like 5 lines just stops it completely.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So yeah, it's a disappointing ending, but it's a brilliant story.
It is a great story. I'm not going to dispute it, and I think the way that he's written it as it's being told is you know, it's so informal. The way that it's written, I think, is fantastic.
That lends itself to the horror within it, doesn't it? The fact that you're sort of like getting a story that's being narrated by somebody who's not artificial, who's not false in any way.
Yes.
It's just sort of like a human being narrating this bloody scary story to you.
Yes, and very, very realistic dialogue at times as well. When he's got the old fellow at the end talking about Gord, that's his name, Gord. I knew I'd get it, Gord. You know, you'd never repeat a name like, you'd never write that now, that line.
Yeah.
You wouldn't even write it in a script if you're trying to be realistic. But that's exactly the way that people used to talk at times. You just repeat it because you just, I've remembered that. Yeah. And then you constantly, very, very quickly confirm to yourself that you remembered it and that you're brilliant for remembering it. And that's kind of what he does. And, you know, there's lots of that. And that's why I found it difficult to start with, I think, because I wasn't expecting that level of informality to be on such an old piece of work as well, actually. You know,
it's surprising, isn't it? There's some really good bits out there that we're overlooking because of their age.
Yes.
Which is a genuine shame, really. And yeah, this is actually a lovely learning experience. I'm really enjoying this.
It's been, it's fantastic. It's been great so far, and it makes you read things that you haven't either read, or it makes you look at them in a slightly different way. I saw one of the comments on the Shirley Jackson one last week. There's a couple of people saying the same thing of they read it because we've told people what to read, and they're reading along with us, which is great fun. And then, you know, they said the same sort of thing of, it's dull and boring. And then they listened to us talk about it, and it's still dull and boring. But they actually then started understanding why it was dull and boring, which is quite interesting. And to be perfectly honest with you, we only really found that out because we talked about it. Not that's the only reason we discovered it. And it's like with this one, I think the more we talk about it, I am genuinely going to go back and actually read it again after this discussion, because I think now we've had this discussion, I might even get even more out of it. It's such a weird piece for the amount of layers it's got. It's without really having any. It's really strange for that. So
yeah, and again, like with which story was it that we were looking at? Where I can't remember now, but the horror in and of itself, it's all happening off stage.
Yes,
which is the best place for horror to happen, because that way your imagination makes it so much fucking worse.
Yeah, I like mixing it a couple of times. I do like kind of. Because I love Clive Barker, and he's very much show everything. You know, you've seen everything, and here's some more, just in case you missed what you were supposed to be looking at before. So I quite like that kind of a bit of each. I do like it off screen, so to speak, or off page, so you get that nervous tension. But I do like the confirmation of something being nasty, so that you can kind of go, oh, there's a severed hand. And everyone go, disgusting. What's that, severed hand? And then later on, you can then do something off screen, but you've already left them with that image to inform their imagination of what's going on. You know,
they know that whatever it is that's off screen, it's even worse than a severed hand.
Yeah.
So it must be bad. Yeah.
Yeah. So I like those little, and I'm finding that with these short stories, actually, those lovely little tricks, like what he did here, what Mr. James did on this one is it did that whole kind of like, it was a curiosity until you got the servant looking at it and telling you, no, this is really bad, you know, and that change of atmosphere, in a way, it changed the way everybody looked at it. It suddenly created an urgency for people to then research what the house was. You know, everything suddenly came off the fact that this person was horrified by this, where the others weren't. They weren't horrified. They were curious.
Yeah, I think they were too intelligently stupid to be unsettled by it.
Yes.
Which, yeah.
I appreciate. emotionally removed from it. It's that kind of academic thing, isn't it? They completely removed themselves from the horror to study.
Which, so it's just a case of, oh, well, there's various things moving within this picture, but but even though phenomenon like that doesn't happen, we'll just sort of like carry on talking about golf and ports. Yes,
and then we'll go and have another look at it after the golf and port and a bit of tennis. Where's breakfast? We've got a breakfast. Have they bought us breakfast yet? It was all that. It really sort of like you could smell the dust in the rooms, couldn't you?
Yeah, loved it.
So it was very good. Honest, didn't really get it when I first read it, but I got the core idea, and then the more I got into it, like you say, multiple reads of it does bring it through. It's a very creative piece. It's really, I'm looking forward to Mark Gatiss. He's done a adaptation of it, hasn't he? It's coming out this Christmas.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to that.
That will be interesting.
Yeah,
that would be very, very interesting to see. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for making me read that one.
Right, go on then. Shock us all with what we've got for next week.
I'm going to up the ante a little bit in terms of
it's your ante, is it?
I'm going. Yeah, all my aunties are now dead. That's all I can say. Right. And I didn't kill them. Honest. In length, I'm going to up the ante. Oh, this isn't getting any better, is it? It's just not getting any better. We're going to go for a novella this time.
Go on. Which one?
And this is
mine.
We're going to read The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson.
I quoted Robert Louis Stevenson in the opening of my PhD thesis, where he talks about how looking at the mechanics of writing is like looking at the strings and pulleys that work within a machine. And I've got a lot of time for him. Yeah.
Well, the reason I am picking this one is because I genuinely feel that it has never really been truly adapted.
All right.
So it's one of those kind of things of I'd seen many films at that point. I'd seen Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, which was a wonderful in particularly with the sort of like transgender transition.
That Oliver Reed?
Eh?
Was that Oliver Reed in that one?
No. Oliver Reed was a werewolf. Can't remember who was in it. And I met the lady as well. She was such a fantastic actor. So seen all these different versions of it. Seen everything, falling behind tables with big rubber hairy gloved hands and all that kind of stuff. All the Morecambe and Wise skits of it and everything like that. And then I read the actual story and I found it horrifying. And apparently that's a toned down version. Apparently his original draft of it was so bad his wife made him destroy it. But we'll talk about that next week. But it is. I actually think that they've never really captured it properly in what a thing that is. So there you go. I bet you haven't read it for a while.
I haven't. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yes.
Really looking forward to it. Yes,
it is a goodie this time. Yeah.
Thank you, mate. I am looking forward to that. Anybody who's out there, if you've not hit those like buttons, please hit those like buttons. If you've got a chance to share a link to this with friends or people that you don't like, if you think, do you know what, I've just been bored for the last hour, fuck it, somebody else can have this crap as well. In that case, let people know. There's
a free short story also available, don't forget.
There is?
I'm going to actually add comment on that one. Comment below, and then we will reply to tell you where to go and ask for a free story. Any comment below, we will then put in a reply to say, do this, and we'll send you a free short story. And I'm also going to say is because apparently this is something you do as well. Our subscriptions.
Yes.
Right. If our subscriptions get to a certain number, right? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. If our subscriptions get to let's get to a reasonable number, 25 subscriptions.
Right.
At 25 subscriptions, I will send one of those subscribers a free copy of Blood Ink on Kindle.
I was worried you were going to say dick pic then.
No, it's easy. I can, because I've discovered I can buy Kindle codes, and so I can send a Kindle link to somebody who, when we get to 25, we'll pick someone at random, and we will send them a code for Blood Ink, and they will be able to download the book for free. And then we've, you know, but we've got to get to 25 subscribers, and then we do that, and then we'll give a book away.
When we hit 35, I will send out links to one of my audiobooks.
There you go. Perfect. See, this is what you spread the word, and you start getting free stuff.
I've made a typo on my name, haven't I? No, I'll leave it.
No, I'll leave it.
So,
because that would be a very interesting kind of a version of it. I wonder if anyone's actually done a porn version of the Mezzotint. Call it the Mezzotint. And they're like reading like Razzle magazine or Shaven Haven or other ones that I believe exist. I don't know. And they just have pictures that keep moving and they just can't put it down.
I'll see if I can work on a story about that when I finish looking at this Carol Vorderman Mezzotint that came up earlier. Yeah.
Oh, that was one thing I forgot to mention. Oh, thank you. It's the testing it, weren't they? They were testing sympathetic ink. He uses the term sympathetic ink, which is invisible ink.
All right.
And I thought that was quite nice because it made me look it up. What is sympathetic ink? And it sort of got curious into thinking, oh, so they're looking at it from a science point of view, and is there like layers of different inks that activate at different environmental things? And it was one of those. It was another lovely idea that didn't seem to go anywhere. It just like the photograph and all that sort of stuff. You had lots of really, really fantastic little ideas going on that never got developed. You know, in that way.
Which developed.
Yeah, I got that.
Yeah.
Yeah, nearly set that one up as a competition. If you get the pun.
Yeah. So if you don't like puns, in that case, dislike buttons are there as well. But hit the like button. Yeah.
Yeah,
and
complain
please
about
subscribe.
Anything like that. This was wonderful again, Ash. This has been fantastic. Thank you very much.
It's been great. Thank you. And really looking forward to next week because, this story, it's been a while since I've been into it. And I'm just looking forward
there might
to
be
it.
a possibility that next week's might be a two-parter because I actually think it's going to go. We might not cover the whole thing next week. We'll see how it goes.
Brilliant.
Cool. All right then.
Great. Thank you for that.
See you now.
And subscribe.